is
Please
fine.
introduce, welcome and introduce.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible,
Yes.
and just tell the tech team to take a pic of, let all the participants, once you introduce, let
Yes.
them take, everybody put your videos, cameras on, and
Yeah.
can be taken once you introduce. Hello, ma'am. Hello.
Right, ma'am. So, a very good morning to you all present today. I'm Ridhishmita Barua on behalf of Dayal Singh Evening College, English Department. Welcome you all to the second day of the National Conference on Resistance and Revolution, the Politics of Marginality. In this technical session today on gender and marginality, we have the honor to have with us as the chair Dr. Hina Nandrajo. May I have the proud privilege to introduce ma'am to you all today. Dr. Hina Nandrajo is an associate professor in the Department of English and currently serving as officiating principal, Vivekananda College, University of Delhi. After her MPhil in English from the University of Delhi, she completed her PhD from Punjabi University, Patiala. She is an academic scholar, critic, teacher, and translator. Her areas of interest are the partition of India in 1947 from a historical and literary perspective, the idea of diversity and multilinguality in India, and translation. She has served on deputation to Institute of Lifelong Learning, University of Delhi, and been actively involved in creating a content. In addition, she conducted workshops in several colleges of the University of Delhi. She also served on deputation as to Cluster Innovation Center, University of Delhi, where in addition to teaching work, she guided research projects at the undergraduate level, seeking to make interventions in society. In addition, she has helped organize workshops on Indian Sign Language and political and hospital personnel, on police and hospital personnel, and coordinated the running of a short-term orientation course for Indian Sign Language. She has also guided research students for the award of MPhil degree and PhD. She has been a part of several research projects of the Sahitya Academy and Department of English, University of Delhi. She is an avid translator from Punjabi and Hindi into English and has won several awards. Among these are Katha Prize for Translation in 1999 and 2001, and a Consolation Prize from Sahitya Academy in 2007. She was on the panel of jury members for the Sahitya Academy Translation Prize 2008 in Punjabi and has been a part of several translation projects for the National Book Trust, Sahitya Academy, Center for Development of Punjab Language and Culture, Punjabi Academy, and Center for Academic Translation and Archiving, University of Delhi, and University Grants Commission. She has presented research papers in international and national seminars, conferences, panel discussions, etc. She has also published a large number of critical articles and translations. We are really honored to have you, ma'am, today with us today. So, may I request all the participants and paper presenters to kindly switch on the video for a while so that we can have a picture.
Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. I welcome all the participants and to the session specially, and also to the listeners and the department. Thank you for calling me here. Shall we wait for the picture to be taken and for the participants to
Participants,
open their
can you
videos
please,
so that yes, so that
can
we
you
can
just
then start.
open your videos so that we can have one picture of everybody together?
Nivedita, Sapna, Kisle, please, can you switch on your cameras?
And the participants, have they switched on their cameras?
Some of them have.
okay in between again when they're speaking we can take a few more snaps, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, shall we start?
Yes, I think we can begin
Let's start.
because so good morning to all of you. I'm happy to be a part of this and honored to be a part of this. Marginality, of course, is an issue that we are constantly grappling with at different levels. And as since this session is on gender, I think that's a kind of universal phenomena where women all over the world of all classes, of all castes, feel that they are marginalized compared to the center. So I think we will not give a long introduction and we will just go to the participants. I do not have the bio notes of the participants, so I would request all the papers presenters to just briefly give their introduction before starting their paper. I think the first paper is by Dr. Santosh, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right? Just let me.
Yes, ma'am. This is
Yes.
Dr. Santosh Bharti. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. So if
Good
you would
morning,
just
ma'am.
introduce yourself, and then I think we have about 15 minutes for every participant.
Uh, Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. My name is Dr. Santosh Bharti, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of English at Delhi College of Arts and Commerce. And today I'm going to be presenting a paper that is COVID-19 pandemic and gender marginalization in India. So I would request the technical team to put my slide on, because slides on, so that I can make use of that and other people can just take a look at that, and then I'll continue with my presentation with the permission of the chair. Sorry. The very first slide, please. Okay, the name. Okay, let's begin now. You can see the very first slide itself, and the topic that I just said it is COVID-19 pandemic. And before going ahead with the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it would be very wise to just dwell into the history of mankind and pandemic and calamities that has always been part of human history. So what one can say about this particular slide that I have it for all of you is that mankind has witnessed several catastrophes even before the advent of the pandemic, and from Antonian plague to Justinian plague in ancient to and smallpox in the Middle Ages to Spanish flu in the differences have undergone mass-scale deaths and even destructions of civilizations after other natural calamities like floods,
Your voice is breaking.
and snuffed out 5 million lives is remarkable.
Dr. Santosh, you'll need to check your mic because your voice is breaking.
Santosh, your voice is breaking.
Am I audible?
No,
Your voice is
maybe
breaking.
you can no. If it helps, you can maybe switch off your video and then speak. Sometimes that helps.
I think her video is already off. And let's see if it works fine. Otherwise, we can go on to the next and then come back to Dr. Santosh later. Do you think maybe you could disconnect?
I'll switch off the video and let's see.
Yeah.
Nini, video is on. If the video is off, now her bandwidth will help. Video and audio sometimes do not go together.
Absolutely, I do agree with you, ma'am. So I'll just switch off the video and then continue with my presentation.
Yeah. Just read your paper, then and you can open a slide on your own.
All right. So I hope I'm audible now, and
Yes.
I should go ahead with my presentations.
Yes,
So I was
please.
just talking about this history of mankind and calamities have added more to the human history and affected them very badly in that sense I was talking about. So the coronavirus pandemic, which was so far infected more than 266 million people and snuffed out 5 million lives, is a reminder of the widespread deaths and destructions that humans have endured over the millennia. Now, the resultant destruction has spawned life uncertainties, disparity in income, and widened gender gaps globally. Situation in India is no different than the rest of the world, and rather than a developing country whose chunk of population relies on agriculture and the informal part of economy for sustenance, Indians, especially women, are amongst the most affected ones. Next slide, please. So if we look at the situation that pandemic has it on poor people, and especially when we're talking about women, what we have realized and have understood, and the data over the ages, over not many, for the last 3 years, I would probably say, has stated very categorically that huge informal sector of the economy has been hit disproportionately, the lives of many, and women are the victims of it. They are worst hit by it. So the frequently extended lockdowns in cities have forced low-skilled women working as domestic workers, as street vendors, or laborers employed in manual, menial jobs to return to their villages where poverty is high and opportunity low. Although the economy is slowly kicking back in after the lifting of lockdowns in July this year, demand for local wares or the service of the low skilled workers is yet to pick up to the pre-pandemic level in cities. Now, crisis is further compounded for low skilled women earning daily wages in a social economic environment marked by poor support system infrastructure, also at the same time by rampant poverty, gender bias, and inequality. Now, India has one of the worst, or you can say highest rates of unemployment, thing, especially in the informal sector. And the pandemic has made it even worse, leaving the vast majority of citizens outside the protection of the labor laws or any social security net. Now, the periodic labor force survey conducted by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation during the period of July 2019 and to June 2020 reveals that the unemployment rate in general and among the youth during April to July 2020 rose to 35.9% and 34.7% from 9.1% to 21.1% during the previous quarters. Also, the gendered experience of formal workers during lockdown period different, with women bearing the worst of terms of decline in their general well-being on account of compromised health, spurt in domestic abuse, and no or little income during the lockdown period. Next slide, please. Now, if one has to look at the situation in particular, one really talks about the situation that has affected women, and this I would be doing so um, by taking into account the India Spend, which is a non-profit charitable trust, which reported that in his series when they came out with this particular data, that is women at work, that the COVID-19 pandemic has deteriorated the employment situation or the condition for each and every woman in general. And women as entrepreneurs or as employees working in various companies or call centers either lost their jobs or were forced to work on low income. Now, this particular report, which examined the barriers to women's employment and the possible solutions, revealed most of the women were struggling to either find a new job or continued working on low-paying jobs. Now, it reported a higher ratio of unemployed women than men during the November 2020, with 13% of women and only 2% men searching for jobs when compared to the period a year ago. Urban women were the most hit, and that is what the reports say. At the same time, if we look at the data with the Center for Monitoring Economy, Indian economy Economist data gathering and analysis company showed urban labor force contraction left as a staggering 27.2% of women unemployed against 2.8 urban men during November 2019 to November 2020. Now, total employment in general for women in India reduced by 22.83% during this period. Fifth slide, please. The next one. So, what one can say about this particular pandemic, which has affected women mostly, is the kind of hardships that they have endured, and the hardships that they have endured are very much reflected in the slides. So, with the emergence of the new potent variants, and now we have Omicron and Delta, COVID-19 pandemic is far from over yet. So it's not going to go away so that easily. Even as the world grapples with more deaths, infections, and threats of more lockdowns, should the new variant test the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines, the world remains an uncertain place. So, according to International World Economic Forum, India is among the worst hit last economies on account of COVID-19. The situation is unlikely to change for better anytime soon. The risk of lasting cost from the pandemic also persists. The outcome shortfall from the pre-pandemic path at the end of year 2022 in the medium G20 emerging market economy is projected to be twice that in the medium G20 advanced economy, and they're particularly high in India and Indonesia. Now, OECD trimmed India's annual economic growth rate estimates from 12.2% in March to 9.9% in June and to 9.7% in September this year. Irrespective of the initiatives by the government to ameliorate the situation, the risks of resurgence of COVID-19 cases on account of Omicron mutant and the likelihood of more lockdowns in the near future indicate the economic situation and employment scenario may even remain grim in the time to come. Besides the economic hardships, women have also suffered from high incidences of domestic violence and sexual assaults. Gender-based violence incidences have gone up after India announced lockdown in its cities on March 23rd, 2019, and domestic violent cases against women in general has escalated dramatically. Now, the movement restrictions in cities and villages on account of prolonged curfews forced the women to live in close proximity with the abusers for 24/7 for months. Now, according to National Commission for Women, violence against women in their homes almost doubled during the pandemic, with the closure of school, colleges, offices, and other communal places. Women in India have battled physical violence from their aggressive partners, as well as the constant pressure, constantly kind of managing the household work, managing their children, and of course, without any support from friends and family on account of restrictions on visits. The increased workload and the constant humiliation or worst physical and verbal assaults in front of the children increase their trauma manifold. Women are also disproportionately disadvantaged due to insufficient healthcare facilities, and that is no denying of this particular fact. Irrespective of their domicile in rich developed nations or poor developing countries, women in general have suffered the most. They are the silent victim of the coronavirus pandemic the world over. Irrespective of the space they occupy inside or outside their homes, and their association to any culture, class, ethnicity, religion, or country, women have experienced physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. Their condition has been aggravated by constant stress of coping with the financial difficulties and the veiled threats of aggression on account of alcohol consumption by the men at home during the lockdown periods that at times stretched up to 6 months, and prolonged lockdown became like a second pandemic or the shadow pandemic for the danger they pose to the physical and mental well-being of the women. It is now widely recognized that gender-based violence is spread all over, and it is in fact tolerated despite its recognition as a human rights violation. The prevalence of gender inequalities in all societies, although in varying degrees, has compromised the health and life dignity of women women. This is why COVID-19 pandemic has aggravated their misfortunes by increasing their vulnerabilities and by deepening social inequalities. Women are struggling with the trauma of being cut away from friends and family while being left to their own devices to manage family chores and to deal with the exploitative partners in what have been the most extensive lockdowns in the human history. The socioeconomic
Pardon me
hardships.
for interrupting, but you have 2 more minutes.
Yes,
Yeah, go
yes,
for it.
please. I'm winding up. Thank you. So extended social lockdowns in the human history, the socio-economic hardships, and the immense pressure of multitasking all at once without the assistance of the traditional social support infrastructure on account of closed schools and prohibited visits to friends and extended family has damaged the health of a large number of women across the world. Now, the sixth slide, which I think will be the second last slide, the impact of work from home. Can I have that slide, please, up? Thank you. The work from home phenomena has also unwittingly added to the chaos wherein boundaries between the personal and the private domain has been blurred significantly, and the women have to constantly juggle between household chores to work office to minding young children and all the chaos that arises on account of everyone staying at home all day long. This has pushed the stress levels to all-time high as gender expectations have still not changed in households. With women are still doing most of the household work, the pandemic has brought to fore the prevalence of hidden misogynism, whereas men seem to be have embraced the idea of gender equality, yet it comes to household work, traditional values dominate. And with the COVID-19 virus likely to be living amongst us for years to come, it looks like fresh effort are needed to reclaim the grounds towards ensuring equal social and economic opportunities to all, irrespective of their gender, social hierarchy, and race. The last slide, which I would quote from the World Bank, what it basically talks about is that social inclusion is the process of improving the terms on which individuals and groups take part in society, improving the ability, opportunity, and dignity of those disadvantaged on the basis of their identity. And with that, I note my presentation. And yes, I would like to close this presentation with one particular thing that we all need to think. Are women actually, we talk about being very advantageous, but are we advantageous is something that we all need to think it over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Santosh. I think we are reserving the comments and questions for the chat box so we can go on with the next presentation, which is Dr. Rakhi Chauhan from Kalindi College, who will talk on gender on the edges, representation of Mizo women in politics. So, Dr. Rakhi, you're welcome. I hope she has joined us and is in the process of starting her presentation. Is Rakhi there, or shall I go on? No, I don't see her there. So shall we go on to the next person?
Rakhi doesn't seem to be there in
Yes.
the
So
participant list. Yeah.
Mridul Mrinal is Mridul Mrinal there? Gendered experience and identity struggle.
Hello, ma'am. Am I
Yes.
audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Yes, please continue. And please introduce yourself before beginning.
Yeah, sure. So, good morning to all. And I think I'm visible as well as I'm audible.
Yes.
Respected Chair, Dr. Nandrajog, respected dignitaries, and my co-presenters. I have a request. I have some late addition to my PPT, so I would request the uh, chair to permit me to share my slide, if it is okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
You could just introduce yourself in the.
Um, have some technical.
You could tell us a little more about yourself while you are setting your screen and about your
Yeah,
interests.
yeah, sure, ma'am, sure.
Yes.
Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Mridul C. Mrunar, and I'm working as an assistant professor of English, PG Department of English, MS Kebim College, Kerala, and I share my gratitude to all the organizers for permitting me to share my idea here. Just give me 1 minute, man. Yeah, yeah. I think now it is visible. Yeah, so sorry for the delay. So I think without much time ado, I'll start my presentation. So my topic is gendered experience and identity struggle, a discourse on the social stratification element in Arundhati Roy's The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. So, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness is one of the notable works of Arundhati Roy, the Booker Prize winner. It is her second book, fiction, after the famous The God of Small Things. And it is one of the most discussed discussed fiction. Actually, it is a political fiction that discussed in across the academia of various disciplines. So here what I'm going to do is that uh, although mainly I'm going to discuss about gender, that is gendered experience and gendered identity, I'm also diving into some other aspects such as religion and conflict, especially some of the contemporary conflict that faced by the country. So without much delay, let me share the next slide. These are my objectives to identify the gendered experience and social taboo and study on the establishment of gender identity in wake of socio-political struggles, discourse on the social stratification elements. And these are some of the methodologies I have used here. So I would like to start with the biography of the author, that is Arundhati Susanna Roy. Actually, there is no need to introduce the author here, but why I'm deliberately trying to introduce or put a biography here is that because I'm also diving into some of the aspects, some of the semi-autobiographical aspect of the author that she tries to bring in the this particular political novel, that is the Ministry of Utmost Happiness. So for a comparison, for the purpose of a comparison, we'll just go through the brief biography of Arundhati Roy. She's an Indian author and activist. She was born on 24th November 1961 in Shillong, Assam. Then it was Assam, now in Meghalaya, India. She advocates for human rights and environmental causes. She is one of the notable activists in India. We all know about that. She went to the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi. She was having her career in architecture, and her debut novel, God of Small Things, was published in 1997. She has published numerous works of non-fiction, more than fiction, and she currently resides in Delhi. So, yeah. So, the particular novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, it's a new dual narration. And what is a dual narration? Here, look at the title of the PPT, Dual Narrations, a balance of fiction and reality on marginality and resistance. So, what is marginality and what is resistance? Marginality would be the cause for resistance. See, there are a lot of social stratification parameters are there. For example, gender is there, religion is there, race is there, creed is there, and unfortunately in India, there is also caste is there. The dual narration of the novel with characters interlinked indicates the dichotomy of narrative realities. So, if you already read the novel, you must know that the novel is divided into two major narrations. One of the narration belongs to an intersex known as Anjum, and the other belongs to Tilottama, the two main characters here. So the first narrative of the intersex Anjum is a protruding one, and it is filled with fictional elements. The second one, the narratives of Tilottama, bears resemblance to the non-fictional elements because of the semi-autobiographical elements of the author, that is Arundhati Roy herself. So the graveyard and the Jannat funeral home, which becomes a symbolism in the in particular novel, outstanding the marginality and the resistance that follows. So if you read the first narrative, especially of Anjum, you could sense a kind of entire, fictional elements there. But if you read about Tilottama, the second narrative, you could sense a kind of reality in there. So there is a dual narration which Arundhati Roy is trying to portray. Yeah. Now about the gendered experience. So here, Anjum is a intersex. She or he, we don't have a proper term to describe transgenders in many Indian languages, although some languages do have. Okay, so here you can see the establishment of the transgender identity, the identity of Anju, how she established herself as a prominent person among the community of the Hijras of the Shahjahanabad, the old Delhi, among the conservative Muslim community, how she is establishing herself. The society's paradox on accustoming with transgenderism in the background of strict tradition. So we can see that the society is very strict in Arundhati Roy's the Ministry of Most Happiness. So she's trying to overcome all the boundaries, all the hurdles, and try to establish herself as the prominent figure in that neighborhood of Hijras. Anjum served the purpose of a bridge between the alternative perspective of customization with gender transgenderism. So here, although she has been came she came out from her home, she's still maintaining a kind of bond with her mother and also her brother, that is Sadiq. So here you can see that although she coming out of all the all the convention, all the strict religious boundaries, but yet she is trying to maintain a kind of a familial bond with her family. And the Hijra culture is accepted from various angles in the society. So there are different kinds of perspectives on Hijra culture that is being presented by Arundhati Roy in this particular novel. But you can see that there is a changing perception of Hijra culture. Especially there is a scene, the old Hijras and the new Hijras. Especially there is a scene in the second narrative where Anjum tells that nowadays sex changing surgery is very easy. They don't have to undergo the painful procedures that we have undergone. So everything is changing. The perception of Hijra is changing. The other aspects, especially the old Hijras are entirely different from the Hijras or the person who is identifying as Hijras in the present day, especially the second half of the 21st century. Now, religion. I would like to discuss about religion. That is one of the protruding element in the novel. Religion, a point of conflict for both politics and gender. So, religion is viewed as a criteria for conflict. As Arundhati Roy is a activist herself, she is dealing with a lot of sensitive elements in her fictional works as also in her non-fictional works. So religion here is using as a criteria for conflict. The cause varies from political to gender. So the cause for viewing religion as a criteria for conflict can be differ from politics to gender. Here, the subjugation and domination is the recurrent phenomenon. So subjugation of one group, domination of the other group, and it is a continuing cycle. And the unbalanced depiction of faith in narration. This is one of the important element which I would like to discuss. So Arundhati Roy is trying to bring a lot of incidents related to conflict, both gender and also religion and also politics. So here there is an unbalanced depiction of faith in narration. Maybe that is because of the personal, choice of Arundhati Roy. Um, it is up to the author, but we have a reading that there is an unbalanced depiction of faith in the narration. Conflict, a matter of resistance and marginality. So, as I already told you, although gender is the important aspect, here I'm also trying to cover some of the conflict that Arundhati Roy trying to portray here. She is also trying to discuss several conflicts that we have witnessed, especially Kashmir separatism, Naxalism in the Red Corridor, Gotra incidents, anti-corruption protests of 2014, and also even the Una lynching that happened in uh, in the second decade of the 21st century. So she is trying to combine all this conflict, and she's trying to incorporate this into this political novel. And it was you can say that this attempt is one of the beautiful attempt, one of the brilliant attempt. I don't know how to how to address this attempt by Arundhati Roy, but she is brilliantly trying to incorporate every kind of conflict, and she is successful in portraying the stature of the country right now, and autobiographical elements. So the second narrative is mainly based on the character Tilottama. So here we can ask a question whether the character Tilottama is a matter of self-realization, whether it is Arundhati Roy herself. If you look into the first book of Arundhati Roy, The God of Small Things, so you can see that she's drawing inspiration from her own life, especially the place where she was brought up and her social background, as well as the
Mr.
cultural
Mridul, I
background.
will need to ask you to keep time in mind, please.
Okay, ma'am. This is my second last slide. I hope so. So here you can see the roots of Tilottama in the Syrian Christian Nasrani community in Kerala. And Tilottama is also an activist, and she is also expressing sympathies towards the marginalized. And just like Tilottama, Arundhati is also just like we have saw in her profile. She's also had her career in uh, architecture, and also the two marriages which we can see a resemblance between Arundhati Roy and Tilottama. Arundhati Roy was twice married with Gerald Dikanya and also Pradeep Kishan. And here also Tilottama we can see in the novel she's married to Nagraj Hariharan and also Musa. Although they haven't been married, they have a kind of a couple relationship. So as a conclusion, I would like to say that the Ministry of Utmost Happiness experiments the gender experience and identity with socio cultural and political aspects in the contemporary India. The elements of marginality and resistance followed is a new experiment in the Indian English fiction. The uncertainty on the ultimate judgment on the incident narrated are a qualifying factor for branding it as a political novel. So, with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you uh, uh, all the one who are presented here. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Mridul. May I now request Dr. Charu Arya to start her presentation, Constructing Radical Discourse on Dalit Feminist Identity, Reading Dalit Poetrics in Translation.
Yeah. Hi, hello, Dr. Hina. And first of all, I'm Charu Arya from Department of English, Maharaja Agrasen College, University of Delhi. And my research area has always been Dalit writings, gender writings. I have been working on Dalit autobiographies in translation, and so many other writings, which are connected with these areas. Though I did my PhD in American literature, Mark Twain, novels of Mark Twain. But after that, my interest area shifted to Dalit writings and gender writings, and that's how I'm here today in this conference presenting my paper. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Brati, for giving me this opportunity to present this paper today in front of all of you. Thank you very much. So I would be reading certain things, and then I would talking about, like, what I have to talk about, the Dalit feminist discourse in the current time and before this. There are a few theories which I would like to discuss, and I would definitely be talking about them in detail. So, with the time, keeping in mind, the time constraint that I have today. So, agitation in voicing the silence defines birth of Dalit literature. I believe that, Dalit literature has been born because of the silence for years. Now it is the voice that it is getting through the writings of many, the indigenous writings, and then in the local, like, writing languages that these people have tried to write, and then these writings have been translated into English and other languages so that it can reach to the larger number of audience. Then why do we need to debate on Dalit feminism? Dalit feminist movement was receiving stepmotherly treatment by the upper caste feminist movement. Reason was clear. Issues related with Dalits were reasonably different and could not be collaborated with the feminist movements. A movement, though started late in India after Western feminism had already made its path clearer, it led to finally challenge the accustomed, valuable domination of patriarchy. Baburam Bagal, he considers Dalit uh, literature as human literature. He analyzed that women portrayal in different literary forms also started feminism. Now, Dalit literature written by female writers dwells into portrayal of Dalit women as victims of caste prisoners because they are not allowed to exit their own caste. Being the honor of the female, of the males of their families, they remain the torch bearers of the sufferings that the Dalit male goes through. The silence carried in Dalit literature creates a modern movement of Dalit feminism while giving voice to the suffering of Dalit women that is heard but remains unheard in these vital traumatic experiences of Dalit writings. While analyzing Dalit women movement further, we have to understand nature of oppressor and oppression. A movement that describes the level of atrocity faced by Dalit women is different from the violence faced by women from non-Dalit households. And here we need to analyze that within the discourse of Indian feminism, has the Dalit question been addressed? Can we say that Indian feminism has actually tried to talk about the Dalit feminism as well? And this leads to the identity of a Dalit, which begins from his or her birth to every action of his or her life. Quoting Sunaina Arya and Akash Singh Rathore from Dalit Feminist Theory, they take in their book, quoting it, the neglect of Dalit in the Indian discourse or gender is uh, is deeply problematic because Dalit women occupy subordinate positions in most organized production of feminist knowledge. So they are never ever treated equally to other females. So that subordination is visible in every Dalit feminism or whenever we are talking about feminism in any form connected with Dalit women. Caste class privileged women have multifarious options, but can we say the same about the subaltern Dalit women who are victims of violence because of their class, caste, and gender, all three? And this Dalit women, so Dalit women are forced into prostitution. They are expected to give sexual favors and are impregnated by upper caste men. And this exposes the criminal nexus between caste, class, gender, and sexuality. I've added third term here, which is sexuality. Okay. And this Dalit women body has been described in a strong voice in the poetry of Namdel Dhasal, a very two very famous poems which are also part of our syllabus. Hunger and Mandakini Patil, a young prostitute, my intended collage. These poems have tried to establish the shattered, broken body as the voice of a woman, and the strength of the body is increased with the pain being the picture of their body. So it is not only the collage of the body, but it is also the collage of the pain that a woman undergoes being a Dalit prostitute. Uh, where Indian feminism talks about empowerment of the body, Dalit women loses it the day she is born in a Dalit household. Nivedita Menon, though, has opposed the need to recognize women with identities other than gender, as it weakens the feminist struggle. So she says that, it's not only that, you cannot deny the identity of a woman as a woman because of the body that she's born with. Because if you are going to leave that gender issue, then the feminist movement will get decreased. So the caste identity becomes less important than the gender identity. That is what she is emphasizing upon. However, issues of Dalit women have been triply marginalized, cannot be understood and resolved without an intersectional dialogue. In this context, then, how can we ignore the standing strength of Dalit women in social, political, and economic front? I'm quoting a few important lines which are coming from Kimberley Williams Cranshaw's, where, he's describing while talking about intersection of race, class, and gender. I'm quoting, from its inception, intersectionality has had a long standing interest in one particular intersection, the intersection of race and gender. And so we can say that one can add here race, gender, and caste. That end, to that end, intersectionality rejects the single access framework after embraced by both feminist and anti-racist scholars. So can we say that this is also true when it comes to the anti-caste kind of an understanding of this intersectional, description of Dalit women? Intersectionality thus recognizes that people can experience any kind of discrimination, and while examining discourses on discrimination, we need to include everything from patriarchal setup to violence and victimization of Dalit women. Why are we giving so much emphasis to patriarchy as described by Ambedkar? This is a very, I can say that, a very clear description where Dr. Ambedkar has pointed out that patriarchy is the twin sister of Brahminism and gender issue in India. Okay, so the minute you are going to talk about twin sister of Brahminism, and we are going to talk about the upper caste and the lower caste, automatically patriarchy becomes the upper caste representation, and the Dalit caste remains somewhere as the lower or the subordinate caste always. So he says, so moving ahead with it, gender issue in India thereby cannot be discussed and scrutinized by leaving out the question of caste. Reggae observes strongly, and this is something that I think is making a lot of sense to to understand how the caste functions. Otherwise, also, so I quote: in analyzing the caste and gender matrix in Indian society, merely pluralizing the term patriarchy is not enough. The task is to map the ways in which the category women is being differently reconstituted within regionally diverse patriarchal relations. I repeat, within regionally diverse patriarchal relations which are cross hatched by graded caste inequalities. Unquote. So with this, I would like to move towards the conclusion of what I had to say. I'm somewhere trying to conclude this with the two major poetries by Ira Bansore. One is Slave and the other one is Yashodhara. I've seen that, while reading Slaves, I could see that, that she is emphasizing upon that, even in almost all the representation of historical mythical stories of women like Sita and Ahilya, she talks in her poetry, women somewhere has not been celebrated, or a Dalit woman has never ever got a space anywhere around the social patriarchal representation. Women always remain under the shadow of the celebrated manhood in almost all the representation of, even if a woman name is a woman is being represented as the protagonist, she will still remain under the shadows of those male characters. And I would like to conclude with few lines that I would like to read from a Yashodhara poem by Ira Bansode, where she says, reading just the 4 or 5 lines which are at the conclusion. I'm ashamed of the injustice. You are not to be found in a single Buddhist vihara. Were you really of no account? But wait, don't suffer so. I have seen your beautiful face. You are between the closed eyelids of Siddhartha. Yashu, just you. So she has emphasized upon the description of Yashodhara, which has been which she has never got in her representation, and she has talked about and people talk about or celebrate more of Buddha in comparison to the suffering that his wife had gone through. Okay, so with this, I would like to conclude my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you for adhering to the timelines, and it was an interesting presentation. I think we are reserving the comments and questions for later. So, without further ado, I would request Ms. Arshia Parveen to speak on resistance, criminogenic events, predisposition, a thematic study of Hussein Zaidi and Jane Borges, Mafia Queens of Mumbai.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, good morning everybody. I am Arshia Parveen. I am a research scholar at the University of Lucknow in the Department of English and Modern European Language. Today I am going to talk about this particular novel that is written by Hussain Zaidi and Jane Borges, Mafia Queens of Mumbai. Now, the main aim of this paper is to find the cause of crimes and the motivations that invite or shove individual into crimes with a thematic study of this non-fictional book. Zadie got remarkable success for his non-fictional book Black Friday, which was published in 2002, and it was a remake of the event of the 1993 Bombay bombing. Zadie is kind of infatuated toward the Mumbai and the crime scenes there, and he continued writing about the Mumbai mafia and generate a new standpoint with his non-fictional book, that is Mafia Queens of Mumbai. This is a masterpiece because it is a divergent from the usual male overriding story of Mumbai mafia, and bring a new fresh insight by telling the life story of female gangster. The book is a research of the life of these female gangsters, including Janabai Daruwala, Brothel Madam Gangubai, and Monster Mall Monica Bedi, and many more. These selected 13 women violate the law and disturb the harmony of established society. Some of these women deliberately choose the path of crime, and some were left with any choice. The strain and social learning theory noted the criminal activities often arises from the individual's resistance and event of condition described by the society. So it is like if the society is forcing someone to follow some certain rules and they do want to follow that rule, so it create a there is establishment in the society and they try to break that establishment. This research paper aims to look out how Zadie and Borges investigate these lives of mafia women and how they were able to make their way up in a way that was undoubtedly a man's word. Just a second. Now, as Rudyard Kipling says, that the female of the species is deadlier than male. It is the perfect example. This book is a perfect example of this quote. And male villains are interesting, but the female villains are more interesting. That's what Vishal Bharadwaj tried to convey in the preface. But I proceed through the stories of these underworld women, and I find them a lot of innocence, good nature, and bit of a consuming of grey shade. Most of them were helpless by the situation, and only a few were real villains. This was the first time I read Zadie, and he is a journalist, and he looking into these women with a new perspective and bring a new insight for us. Thank you. I concluded. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a very short presentation, but an interesting one. I wish you had built a little more into it and told us, perhaps, if you can just talk about since you read the book, about the interesting episodes that you came across in the book, if you would like to
Okay.
do that.
Yeah, definitely. I would love that. Okay, so I will definitely talk about the first woman, that is Janabai Daruwala. She is a woman, and she is a woman who is trying to give advice to Dawood Ibrahim, and he is one of the biggest name of in Mumbai mafia. But he comes to her and bow his her in front of her and asks for his advice. So that's why his character is very important, because Mumbai Mafia is a world of men, but this woman is someone who is trying to is like a mother to her, and he respect to her. So that's why her character is very important. Now the second is the character of Monica Bedi. Her character is very important because we all know her and we all have certain kind of assumption about her, that she was with a particular gangster. But what was her condition? She was not aware that he was a gangster, so that's why we got to know the real reason why she was there and how she ended up in such kind of a situation. So that's why these characters are very important. I think that would be enough.
All right. Perhaps we
Thank
can
you.
come back to you with questions later.
Yeah, sure,
So
sure.
I would
Thank you.
request Ms. Shraddha Kumar to talk about No Room for Women, Gendered Experiences in Politics.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hina, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my work. I'll give a bit of a background about myself. My background is in psychology. I've recently completed my master's in applied psychology from Tata Institute of Social Science in Mumbai, and I'm currently working as a researcher. So my paper is an empirical one, and can my presentation be shared, please? I think I'd shared the link for my presentation. Thank you. Um, all right. Could you go to the first slide, please? Thank you. My paper is about experiences of women who are politicians in India. Uh, so, uh, Women tend to be very underrepresented in politics. Um, and this is true for all countries, but especially India. And women have faced cultural and prejudicial challenges in entering politics. And these include having to deal with gender stereotypes, having to balance their personal and professional lives, along with gender distribution of work within the political party. So, for example, when women do manage to enter politics, they are assigned to roles such as education and healthcare, which are more stereotypically linked with women. Additionally, another challenge that women face in politics is that they lack the same level of access to informal networks that their male counterparts have, which also disadvantages them in politics. And interestingly, women lack a marginal place in politics, not just because, um, so women are not unwilling to participate in politics. They want to participate in politics. Unfortunately, there are psychological and structural barriers that prevent women from entering and participating in politics. Next slide, please. Okay. So if you look at the Indian context, even though we've had very prominent women in politics such as Sarojini Naidu, Indira Gandhi, more recently people such as Sushma Swaraj and Pratibha Patil, only 14% of parliament members in India are women, which puts us behind other South Asian countries such as Nepal, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Um, the 73rd Amendment of the Constitution guarantees 33% reservation for women at the grassroots level, and some states have even gone up to 50% reservation. Unfortunately, there has been documentation that very often when women do contest in elections, they act as extension to their male family members. So this is a concept that has been dubbed as panchayat patis, where the male family members exert political power on behalf of the women. So even with representation guaranteed in the constitution, women are still struggling to make their presence felt in politics. And a reason for this is the mainstream culture and traditions in India, which still serve as a barrier to women's political participation. So women still do majority of the domestic household work and things like that, which prohibits them from participating in politics. Next slide, please. Can you please go to the next slide? Okay. So I'll just continue. So there are a couple of theoretical explanations for why women aren't represented in politics. So there's the role congruity theory by Eagly and Carrow, which talks about how men are ascribed traits that are different from women. So men are ascribed traits such as competent, aggressive, and decisive, and women are ascribed more communal traits such as kind, sympathetic, and relationship oriented. And the traits that are used to describe men are also the traits that people use to describe leaders, and therefore women are less likely to be seen as leaders. Similarly, there is the gender schema theory by Ben, and which talks about how different schemas are activated amongst voters while voting for candidates. So while male candidates are seen as political candidates for elections, women, when they stand up for elections, are not evaluated as candidates. Rather, they're evaluated as under the separate category of women. So while voters don't see men and women in the same way while they're voting in an election. So I'll move on to the present study. Um, so there is a lack of empirical information about women politicians in the Indian context, and my research is an attempt to understand the lived experiences of Indian women in politics. So for this study, I used interpretative phenomenological analysis. So IPA is a qualitative methodology which seeks to understand how individuals give meaning to their experiences of the personal and social world. And it utilizes what is known as a double hermeneutic, where the researcher tries to make sense of how the participants try to make sense of their own world. So the researcher uses their own experiences to understand how the participant understands their own world. Um, so for this research, I interviewed three participants who were elected municipal representatives in New Delhi. And I did semi-structured interview with them for which ranged for about 45 minutes each. Unfortunately, there were time constraints because of which there couldn't be more sustained interaction with the participants. And the interviews were recorded with consent and analyzed as per the prescriptions of interpretative phenomenological analysis. Um, so I'll move on to the results. So each participant had very unique ways
Do you
of.
have more slides or
I do, but
is
can I share my own
yes, please
presentation
do that.
because
Yes,
okay,
please do.
all right, okay. Sorry about that technical difficulty. Um, so each of the participants had their own distinct ways of making meaning from their experiences. And interestingly, while there was no overt sexism present, women did face unique challenges because of their gender in politics. So there are four key themes. The first theme is that women had difficulties dominating spaces that were navigating spaces that were male dominated. The second theme is that because politics is a job that requires you to be in the public eye, women had to perform respectability, which means that they had to dress and behave in a certain way in order to gain acceptance by the public. The third theme is very interesting, and it was about being a woman in politics. And it was about how these participants consolidated their different identities of being a woman and being a politician in very unique ways. So I'll go on to discussing each of these themes in depth. So all of the participants used the term male dominated to describe politics. And they said that despite being elected to the post, the women lacked the same level of access and networks as their male counterparts. It's also notable that all of these politicians came from politically connected families, and many of the seats they held had previously been held by their husbands in the past, and they were assigned to these seats only because their seats had become reserved for women. Um, so they said that their male counterparts had access to wider social networks, which women were informally excluded from. So they would say things like, so for example, sorry. So for example, they would say that, there would be functions or political events that would take on till late at night. And because women had responsibilities at home, they had children and they had families to take care of at home, they would not be able to attend those events, which disadvantaged them. There was also gatekeeping by political parties, which meant that if there were no reservations for seats, then they were reluctant to give women tickets for political positions. And I've given this excerpt by one of my participants. So, and all the names have been anonymized for confidentiality. So she said that men have a lot of social gatherings, and many times you're not present for them. And sometimes it is also considered that men are more powerful. So they can work against the political party also, and they can be Battamese also. So there is something lost because of this distinction. So from this quote, I think it's pretty clear that women recognize that because of their gender, they are placed in a position that sort of disadvantages them compared to their male counterparts. The next theme is performing respectability. So, women, because the job is politics, women have to be present a lot of the time in front of the public, and they have to work really hard to gain acceptance by the public. So, it takes a while for the public to go from seeing them as a woman to seeing them as a politician. But this public scrutiny was recognized as being part of the job. The public also paid a lot of attention to their family background. So if the woman was seen as coming from a political family, that led to an increased level of acceptance. So they were seen as an extension of their family. Women also have to be careful with regard to how they dress, how they speak, and how they behave in public, which is something that their male counterparts don't have to worry about. So, for example, one of my participants said that sometimes when we go out in public and when we speak, so this is another quote by one of my participants who said that when you're in politics, you have to speak and dress up in a very balanced manner. And even your relationships have to be very balanced. Men can speak whatever they want to, but we have to think. And this goes in line with even how the media covers female politicians compared to male politicians. So the coverage about female politicians usually is in terms that sort of sensationalizes and scandalizes them. If you look at old newspaper articles, then you'll find things like, top five best dressed politicians in India, and it's usually like a list of women politicians and what clothes they wear. But this is something that their male counterparts are not subjected to. Okay. The next theme is about being a woman in politics. So all the participants viewed themselves as women, and then they viewed themselves as women in politics. So they had to sort of reconcile how being a woman was compatible with their identity as a politician. So while fulfilling responsibilities and duties at home was important to all of their participants, they also linked how women would be good as politicians. So one of my participants said that from birth, women are associated with management. They handle their household work, they handle their studies before and after marriage. They take care of their children, so why not politics? So they sort of link their identities as women to their identities as politicians. And finally, the participants also talked about the road ahead for women's representations in politics. So they accepted that there were challenges for women in politics, but they also acknowledged that as as they were allowed to enter the field of politics, they experienced growth in knowledge and confidence. So they emphasized the need for more women to enter the field and challenge the status quo. And this goes in line with something that is called the critical mass theory, which says that as a critical number of women enter the field of politics, it's usually taken as about 35%. This will lead to the challenging of male stereotypes about women in politics and will also create more role models for women and girls to enter the field of politics. And all of the participants expressed really strong support for reservations because it is through reservations that women sort of get the chance to enter politics. And again, this is another quote from one of my participants who said that to actually help families understand that politics is not a bad thing. Women need to participate in politics, and reservation is the only mode at present which we require. These are just some of the limitations of the study. So there was a small sample size because it's hard to sort of contact politicians and get them to agree to giving an interview. The interviews are of limited duration, and social desirability could have an impact on the responses. And a final limitation is that the sample of politicians that I talked to were not representative of the general Indian population along the lines of caste, class, and religion. So the politicians I interviewed were mostly upper caste, middle and upper class women. And there has been research that talks about how even women politicians make different decisions along lines of caste. So unfortunately, that is an aspect that I could not cover in the study. Um, and the conclusion is that there are still several barriers that women face in politics. These include constraints placed by traditional gender roles, public evaluations, and lack of access to informal political networks. However, women are interested in and remain committed to politics, but the perceptions of public and the perceptions of the public and political parties need to be addressed, and systemic change needs to take place to ensure that women are equitably represented in politics in the future. That is it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Shraddha. That was an interesting presentation. So the house is now open for questions and comments, and I would like to just say that it was an inspiring session altogether because we had very different perspectives. So we've traversed the terrains of psychology, of politics, of literature, of history, and of recent events in this shape of the pandemic. And we've seen how this kind of a marginalization, which is it's a form of othering, we all face at different levels. We talk about gender, and yet that is only one of the verticals that we see discrimination about. And Mridul's paper brought about the third gender, the transgender, that also faces discrimination at another level. So it's interesting how these papers actually complement each other and talk about the various aspects that we need to keep in mind when we look at marginality and then when we look at gender and marginality. Because ultimately, all of these reflect not only on obviously they impact our lives, but they also continuously impact our behavior towards others. And in a society that we all dream of, a utopia that we dream of where everybody is equal, I think such papers also help us understand and also help create a self-awareness of where we ourselves might hold these barriers in our mind, where we ourselves exclude one gender or one group from total participation. So when I look at Dr. Santosh's paper, and she talks about how the pandemic has adversely affected women to a greater extent than men, certainly that is true. And I think that has been the experience of all of us. As a principal of a girls' college, we find that students are aching to come back to college because that is also a kind of respite for them. When they are at home, they are expected not only to attend their classes, but they are also expected then to carry out all their household chores. And if there is a brother who also has to take a class, and there is only one smart device on which to take it, it is usually the brother who wins the battle, and the girl is left without attending a class. So this is a reality that we are facing every day. Yet I would say that just the disappearance of the pandemic will not right the situation, and that has also been pointed out, how all these differences have only been heightened and not just created there. So when we look at, she gave us statistics to talk about that, how different women's unemployment was from men's employment, etc. I wish we could have also had Raki's paper, because that would have added the tribal dimension to it. However, with Mridul's paper, we look at how the issue of marginalization is a political issue ultimately. It is it, and this I think segs in very well with Shraddha's paper, which talks about how political representation is necessary, and how people are advocating a reservation as a necessary tool, at least for some time, because that is what will ensure that women participate, and once they participate, that the stigma goes away gradually. And how this is a political issue, and we cannot simply brush it aside as a social issue, or as a historical issue, or as an issue of ethics or morality. It is very much a live present political issue. Charu's paper takes us to what is the triple marginalization. There is gender, and there is a third world gender, and there is also the Dalit aspect. Yes, of course, Dalit, it reminds me of Sartre's introduction in Orphinois, where he talks about, he says, when you take off the gags, do you expect that the people will sing your praises, or the black, he's talking in the context of race, but that is also very true of every marginalized section, that once the gags are off, we cannot expect songs of praise, but of resistance. Voices of resistance will rise. When they lift their eyes, they will only carry anger and hostility. And that is true of Dalit literature, and that is a voice that we need to recognize, because that is a voice that has not been heard for very long. And Arshia's paper was interesting, because really, when women become criminals, are they to be celebrated, or are they to be treated as ordinary criminals? Of course, there is an additional angle there. There is an additional, so to speak, a romance there of how women can subvert the male authority by becoming patriarchal in that sense, to rule over communities or rule over societies. So the idea of equality, really, of coming from the margin to claim the center, does it for us mean a replacement at the center, or does it mean a coexistence of all communities together? With these very, very, I am sorry to take up so much time, because this time actually belongs to our speakers and to our readers. So if they would like to comment on each other's papers and what their learning has been from the other papers and from our speakers, the house is now open. Thank you.
May I? May I? I'm so sorry. I'm taking an opportunity. I enjoyed listening to all the papers, and thank you, Professor Hina, for such enlightening words coming from you. Something that I want to just add to, or maybe just connect with what Shraddha had spoken about the political employment of women. So this is something which keeps popping in my mind, that when we are talking about reservation of women in the political forums and parliament and otherwise, Like, after doing all that research, your research has been very interesting, and the interviews that you have taken. Can I just, like, what is your take on this, or what have you analyzed? That do you think that, the reservation of women, or maybe a larger reservation of women in the political forum, or political, like, platforms, do you think will lead to the empowerment of women, or do you think that even there they are going to continuously face discrimination the way women face discrimination in the patriarchal workplaces? And that's just a question, interesting, something that I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Uh,
Just before you respond, Shraddha, I want to ask the organizers whether they want all the questions to be asked and then for each one to take the questions and answer them, or shall we take one at a time? I don't know, Rati, who is moderating this. So in the meantime,
You are the it is
all right,
your
then,
prerogative. You
all
are
right,
the chair.
thank you. Then Shraddha, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Charu. I really enjoyed your presentation as well. And I think it's a very relevant question you pose, and I don't think there's an easy answer to it. But what even my participants, the politicians who I talk to, a lot of them could enter politics only by virtue of reservation. And they did admit that initially, while they started out in politics, they were sort of more an extension of their husbands or their families. But as they sort of spent more time in politics, they were able to sort of gain increases in their knowledge and confidence. And they became more of individual actors and more independent in sort of what actions they took or what work they did. So I think what my hope is that as more women enter politics, maybe through 33% reservations or even 50% reservations at higher level, initially, while it might be the case that it does still continue like patriarchal and male dominated patterns, eventually, as women reach sort of that critical mass, which is very commonly talked about in political theory, then there might be more room for sort of systemic change and making an actual tangible difference in how women are represented.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think your co-writer has also posted why only 33% and why not 50. So how do we rationalize a certain amount of percentage? I mean, is it going to be as per number of voters, etc., and so on? So is there any other question? I don't see any question.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, yes, please do.
Okay, my query is to Srimati Shraddha Kumar. That was an amazing paper. Thank you, especially from a psychological perspective. So, being aware that you have stated the limitation of your paper, but out of my curiosity, I would like to ask you, have you ever, observed any kind of ununiformity, when it comes to the geographical element that women in certain part of India are represented more than when you compare to other part of India. So any geographical disparity when it comes to women in politics, what is your take on it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, the sample of politicians I talked to was all from Delhi NCR, so the empirical evidence that I have is limited from that subset. But there are sort of state-wise differences as well in terms of how women are represented, and I think that depends a lot on the culture of that state as well. So you see, certain states have more levels of representation, and even in certain elections, I think now in state elections, we're starting to see political parties take that initiative where they themselves say that okay, 40% of the tickets will be reserved for women. So I think there's I can't generalize because I'm not an expert in this area, but definitely there is state-wise differences based on the culture and the political sort of dynamic of that state as well.
All right. So, any other questions, any other comments that people would like to make? Because it's been an interesting journey traversing all these different areas and exploring different dimensions of the same question of marginality. And I think you've been doing that yesterday as well. So, looking at gender, yes, within gender, there are so many different aspects that one can consider. And in fact, I would like Arshia to come in and talk about, what is how is how is the presentation of these Mumbai mafia queens? Is it sympathetic? And if it is sympathetic, is it justified? Is the sympathy justified for?
Sure, ma'am. I would. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay, ma'am. So here I would like to mention a character, basically a Mumbai mafia, a women Mumbai mafia. So her name was Ashraf, and then she turned into Sapna Didi. So it all happens because all of a sudden her husband died, and then she turned into Sapna Didi for her revenge. In the starting, she was innocent and naive girl who just doesn't know anything about this world. But this was the situation, so I feel sympathetic toward her. But on the other hand, sell her just for the few pennies. So that's how she turned into a brothel woman. And the title of this chapter is the matriarchy of Gangubai. And she take all these women as their own daughter and try to save them from the cruelty of the red light area. So this is how I feel sympathetic towards them. And then I will again talk about this character, the love story of the famous love story of Abu Sulaim and Monica Baby. We all know how it was, cashed into the media and was very famous. But what was the condition of Monica Baby and how she got into all this? We all know the reality of Bollywood life and how it is very glamorous, but it is very dark from inside. So it also represents its connection with Bollywood life. So I feel that I feel sympathetic toward all these characters that they were there, because I feel they were shoved into these condition and they were just survival. So they did it because of the survival of their own life and for other as well. I
Okay.
hope I was able to answer it.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome,
you.
ma'am.
Are there any other questions?
May I say a few words, please?
Yes, please.
Um, I was a little bit quite curious when I heard Ashia's paper. So far, because I come from a gender research kind of research based program. So what I analyzed from a paper that women have been very active participants, not in just one particular field, but in all the fields, whether it's academia, whether it's politics, or whatever field. But looking at her paper, I did admire the fact that Mumbai Mafia, especially when you're talking about women being or playing a very prominent part in the society, even as mafia. I think something that we look at it from a very negative point of view, but that shouldn't be the idea behind it, because women have taken these steps and women have made a prominent they have carved a space for them, whether that's especially because they have to struggle a lot in at all levels. They have to struggle a lot. So Mumbai mafia women actually coming up forward in order not to counter the male mafia this thing, but of course to carve a knee for themselves. Even when we talk about third genders, I think they are also struggling with their space. So the space has become a very contested issue for all for women belonging to all sections of our society, and whether it's politics, whether it's academics, whether the what you are the principal of a girls' college. You know how women have to struggle at all levels. So this is something that I really admire about Arshia's paper, because for the first time I'm hearing about a paper which is talking about women mafia, which is something very fascinating.
Okay.
So
So
really,
Santosh,
thank you.
I'm sorry to cutting you in the middle, because ma'am was when ma'am was talking, she also said that either it is about equal space or taking up the place that is there. So I would like to quote something from the book if there is time.
Yes,
Sure.
yes.
So the line is like that. The fact that Zenabai is the character, the first story. Okay. So the fact that Zenabai was the only woman there, sitting amongst them and chatting comfortably with the man, said much more about her influence and the respect that she was accrued in the underworld at that time. she was there, sitting among them. The scene is very clear. She is sitting there just like among them, and she is like one of them. So that is the main aim of my paper. I hope
Yes,
I'm. Yes, yes.
yes, you did,
Thank
and especially the lines that you quoted very well brought out the theme of your entire paper, and thank you for that. I
you.
really
Right.
liked your paper. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, and we can draw hope that if women can do so well in the underworld, they can certainly do very well in politics and in all other fields. So, I think that's great. And I think we have run out of our time. If there are more posts, perhaps this can continue at a later stage. So, I will also thank all the participants for these very, very stimulating papers, and also the organizers for giving all of us this opportunity to talk to each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hina Nandrajog, for coming on board. Mridu, take over.
So I once again, on behalf of the English department of the Elsing Evening College, take the opportunity to thank our respected chair, Dr. Hina Nandrajog, for conducting such a wonderful session and, providing her meaningful insights to all the paper presenters. I take the opportunity to congratulate equally all the paper presenters, Dr. Santosh Bharti, Mridul C. Mrinal, Charu Arya, Arshia Parveen, and Shraddha Kumar for such interesting presentations with a wide range of topics. I thank all my colleagues for participating in this session and the other participants at the same time. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all my students who always works behind the scene for us. Thank you all very much. I want to request our respected chair and all the participants to please be present on the valedictory session so that we can provide you with the feedback form for your meaningful suggestions. Thank you all very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.